one's done here. Or should I say here? That's right, we have 2 camera angles this time. Getting fancy. Anyways, in this video, I would like to finally talk about the topic that is the most exciting topic for me right now, which is electronic music production. So here in front of me, I have my entire setup. Some of you might think it's kind of small, which it really is in the grand scheme of things. But right now, for me, this is perfect. I have basically everything I would want here. And considering that I'm still very much a beginner in music, this is more than enough for me to learn right now. So I recently finally recorded a new music track, which I uploaded to my SoundCloud. I think it is definitely the best track I've made, the most structured one, and probably the least unbearable to listen to out of the 5 or so that I've uploaded. Right now, my goal is to just try to make stuff and learn from it and try to get better and better each time. And I think so far I've definitely stuck to that. So in this video, I want to talk about my music setup and how I recorded this track with it. Let's start with the Novation circuit, which is my main brain of the setup. So this is sending clock data to everything else. This is setting the tempo. Then we have this sending MIDI to the artillery key step, which is my MIDI keyboard and sequencer. It's just receiving the clock from the circuit and it is just sending it through to the Volca drum. So the Volca drum isn't actually controlled by the key step, it's just controlled by the circuit on channel 1. And then the key step is sending pitch and gate information to the Behringer Crave, which is my main synthesizer. Then we have the synthesizer going into the TC Electronic Echo Brain, which is my analog delay pedal. I really love this thing. I want to play around with this more. I really like the feedback that it can give if you crank up the repeats knob past like 50% or so. I kind of want to experiment with some more noisy tracks using that with nothing plugged into it, because I think that could give some pretty cool results. And yeah, as for this is my Korg Volca drum, digital percussion synthesizer, as it says. I really like this thing because it can give you some very unique sounds, especially if you use the waveguide and you play around with the different settings. And because all of the Volcas have their motion settings, that means you can have some really cool sweeping effects by playing around with the knobs with the motion sequencing. So yeah, and then I have the Echo Brain, the Volca drum, and the circuit all plugged into my audio interface, which is an M-Audio Fast Track Ultra. And I have this going into my laptop and giving me an output through my headphones so I can monitor everything. And the headphones I have are the Audio-Technica ATH M50, very popular headphones because they're relatively cheap for studio headphones and pretty good quality. Then here off to the side, I have my pocket operator. This is the PO33, quite a nice thing. I know that it's kind of more like a toy than a real music instrument, but I've used it in a couple of my tracks and so far it's served me well. Maybe eventually I'll upgrade that to a better sampler, but right now I'm quite happy with this thing, so I am not really thinking about that quite yet. I've been using that mostly for vocal sampling and stuff like that. Then here I have a microcassette dictaphone. So the reason I wanted to get one like this was, 1, I got quite a bit into tapes and stuff like that. 2, this thing, or anything with tape, gives a really nice distortion effect just because it is a physical tape and there can be various imperfections. And because this thing I bought used and it was quite old, this has a horrendous microphone. It has a microphone right here. You can see how small it is. And it has no option to plug in an external one. But that is exactly what I wanted from a recorder like this. I'm glad that it gives so much distortion because you can't really replicate that kind of effect closely digitally. So I decided that I want to get one. I've not used this in a track quite yet, but I am thinking about using it in my next one. And then this isn't really a music instrument, but I have this Walkman. One thing I could use it for is I could use its radio, because if you tune it to somewhere between stations, you could get some genuine radio static, or I could actually go ahead and sample some cassettes. This is what my collection looks like, by the way, if you are at all interested. So yeah, that's everything. So I guess I'm going to talk about how I recorded my new track with this. So first I recorded my synthesizer part with the Behringer Crave. I have this patched up with a sawtooth wave on the LFO. It doesn't have one normally, but if you send LFO square into LFO rate, for some reason that makes a sawtooth LFO. I still don't understand why that works, but yeah, it does work. So basically I have a saw wave on the LFO and I'm sending the oscillator saw into the external input so that I can mix smoothly between the square and the saw wave. So I had the Arturia key step controlling all of the sequences on this. I actually have like a note where I wrote down all of my different steps and how I want the different sequences to be played at different points in the song. And I personally really like that kind of structured approach because I have a better image of my track and what everything is doing at which point. I know some experienced musicians can probably do that in their head without needing to write it down, or they just use the DAW and have things under control inside the DAW, but that's just how I decided to do it this time. And then I had that going into my delay pedal. So this pedal, as I mentioned, I really like using. I basically had it set to about, guess it's 10 o'clock maybe, on the time and repeats. And I just mixed that in at some point, and then closer to the end of the song, I started playing around a bit more with the repeats and the time, because that can give some really cool feedback effects. That's how I did that nice fade out at the end, or at least I think it sounds really nice. I really love those delay pedal effects when you crank them up real loud. And yeah, then I started working on the drums, and that was actually when I encountered one of my first issues. So I had a big problem in my head about how you make things sound good together in a song, because of course I don't have that much experience with this quite yet. So one day I sat down and tried to bring together my synthesizer part and a drum part I had recorded before on the circuit, and it just did not sound good together at all. It would just clash and just sounded like two separate tracks combined. So after some thinking and also talking to my friend Dan, hi Dan, if you're watching this by the way, I came to realize that I should be thinking of the drums as supporting the synthesizer, at least in this case. Of course, you can make that any way you want. You can make the drums and then try to support the drums with other instruments, but because I started with the synthesizer, I should have been thinking of the drums as supporting the synthesizer. So when I switched my mindset, it really became much better. I found a better kick drum as well, and I think it worked out well in the end. So I came up with different sequences on the circuit for the kick and snare. The kick was a stock kick from the stock Novation Circuit pack, and the snare I actually recorded from my Volca drum. So I recorded the different sequences, went into my note for this track and tried to kind of structure things so that it sounded well with what I had planned out for the synth part. And in the end, I think it worked out well. So the next thing I recorded was the Volca drum. I only used one sound on this. I should have maybe leaned a bit heavier on this, but I'm still very much learning it. I think this is a very deep synthesizer because it has so many different settings and you can do quite a bit with it. But here I just did a hi-hat sound and played a bit with the waveguide. So yeah, same thing for this. I programmed in some sequences on my Novation circuit and I had this playing the hi-hats. It's probably one of the least interesting things about the track. So then I had the last bit, which was the vocal bit, which was kind of silly, but I think near the end it sounded quite nice. So I simply recorded some voice lines into the pocket operator. I think it ended up fine. I really like its onboard effects. They are quite limiting, but I also had this running into the Echo Brain. Because I had everything recorded separately, every track, I could use the Echo Brain for this as well. But when I recorded this, I had the time setting quite low, which gave it kind of a metallic sound, which was definitely nice. So I think overall it worked out well. And then I do have to mention the ending part of the track. So because I've been really into like very kind of noisy music recently, and I kind of like chaos in music, I wanted the end of the track to just kind of really escalate and become really chaotic and stuff. So I decided to have all 4 instruments come in at the end, and I had my synthesizer really cranked up high on the delay pedal. I had the Volca drum playing an increasing amount of hi-hats. I would just add more and more steps, and I played around with the waveguide a lot. Same for the drums here. I used the onboard effects, which some of them are actually quite nice, and I added more and more steps to the drums. And with the PO, I was using a lot of the stutter effects and using the delay pedal to make it more chaotic again, and I really like how the ending part of the track sounds. I'm actually having a friend of mine who goes by Synthead on YouTube do the mix for me, which is quite nice of him. Check out his YouTube channel. He is a massive synth nerd. He collects a lot of different synthesizers. There are certainly many negatives to this track, so it sounds kind of amateurish. It is a little lacking. I have the main synth, but I don't have a bass or any pads or anything like that. I have only 3 percussive sounds, which is certainly an undersight. If I were to do this again, I would lean a bit heavier on the Volca drum and do a bit more of the wacky different sounds that you can make with this, because I'm not really interested in making regular percussive sounds with the Volca drum. I want to use it for weird, glitchy, wacky, strange sounds. Maybe I would also play around with the sequences a bit more, because some parts of this track are kind of repetitive and not much happens. But yeah, other than that, I have to say I am kind of proud of this track, because I learned a lot when I was making it, and it is by far the best one I've made so far, which is to be expected because I'm learning new things. Yeah, I want to keep it that way. I want to keep learning new things about music, and I want each of my tracks to be better than the last one. As I mentioned before, I've been recently a bit more into noisy music. Specifically, I've been enjoying like experimental drone noise type of genres, and I've been really meaning to experiment with them myself. So I think my next track will be kind of in that vein. It is quite a niche thing, but it is something that I'm very much interested in right now. I could use the Crave as a drone because it has the VCA on mode, of course, so you can have it playing continuously. I can use the pedal with maybe nothing going into it, maybe with some weird noise going into it. I could use my Walkman and my tape recorder to add some noise stuff, weird effects, stuff like that. Maybe I could lean in on some of the heavier effects on the circuit, because the further up you go, the more chaotic they get. I guess I could just see what I can come up with. But yeah, that's about it for this video. If you're interested in this type of stuff, please let me know. This is something I've been really interested in recently, and it's brought me a lot of joy, honestly, in this kind of difficult time. So yeah, thank you guys for watching this video, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.